Hello, hello, my friends. AmyR here with Prairie Paper and Ink. Welcome back to my face and my card making space. A couple cards using one of the newer die sets from Simon Says Stamp, the Divine Peony, which again is blown out because of my lights. Whatever. I love peonies. I showed in a recent live stream one of my peonies that I had cut. I have this one remaining because that's all that's left for this year. It's the real deal. It's real. It's not fake. And this is a little one. This is just a little baby one. My other ones were like the size of dinner plates. They were amazing. So yeah, I love peonies. They're one of my favorite flowers. And we're going to do some really easy watercoloring using positively saturated inks, a couple types of splatter, because we can. And yeah, as always, links to everything will be in the description box below the video. My links are affiliate links. That just means that if you click on one of my links, end up placing an order, I get a little kickback from that at no extra cost to you. So it helps pay the bills, keep the channel running, all the things, and let's get into making these cards. The first thing I did was stencil my backgrounds. Well, I did my die cutting, but we'll get to that in a second. I've just got a couple pieces of Canson XL watercolor paper here, and Simon Says Stamp's Stencil Crochet blocks. I've used this in many videos. I really like this stencil. I keep reaching for it, so I'm using it again. And I'm just applying just white opaque texture paste over it. Not worried about getting it perfect, nothing. I want that pattern and the texture. So I'm just applying it with my palette knife, keeping it just thin, like to the level of the stencil. That's, again, just to make it dry faster, really. If you want to add texture, if you really want like raised areas, a lot of texture, it can kind of depend on the stencil you're using. Like you kind of want more open spaces, but even with one like this, you can apply it a little thicker. You can tap your palette knife against the wet paste after you've applied it, like create like extra texture. Just again, it just depends on kind of the look you're going for, but I wanted this to be kind of simple because I'm going to watercolor over it later. So I applied everything, peel out the stencil, immediately went, cleaned off my stencil, cleaned my palette knife, we're good to go. And then I die cut more watercolor paper with the Divine Peony wafer dies. And it's just one wafer die that die cuts, as you can see there, all the pieces. So I did it twice because I was like, I can probably do 2 cards. Like, why not? So I die cut everything twice, and then I'm sticking the pieces to one of my stamp and stencil mats because I'm doing watercoloring. You know, there's generally a method to the madness. I like using my grip mats for pretty much everything. But when I'm doing watercoloring like this, again, if I had maybe less pieces, I'll usually just use a grip mat. That's fine. But there's quite a few pieces I got going on here. So the sticky mat will hold everything in place for me while I add the color. And using my like I said in the intro, using my positively saturated inks to do the watercoloring, you could use any sort of water reactive ink, distress inks, oxide inks, Concord 9th inks, these inks, Altenew's fresh dye inks. You could use traditional watercolors, you know, the sky's the limit. There's all kinds of ways, you know, and I say that because people ask a lot, like, well, how do you choose what you choose? Honestly, for me, it just depends on my mood. I was like, I haven't watercolored with my positively saturated inks in a while. Let's do that. So that's what I did. So I grabbed a bunch of colors that I wanted to use. I used the same trio of greens, starting with cabbage, which is my lightest, and that's what I applied the most of. And I actually have to like mush it onto the palette because I end up using up quite a bit of the cabbage ink because that's my base layer. And I apply that with my water and a watercolor brush, and then I go in and I'm dropping in the darker shades, which was artichoke and kale. And then I even drop in a little bit of yellow, which was honey ink, just to give it that little extra something. And I do all this while everything is still wet. I've sped this up in editing. I do not move this quickly. Like I always said, if there was a way, not necessarily with coloring. I'm fine with coloring taking the real amount of time. But man, I wish there was a way to do this for like house cleaning. Can we just speed it up, please, and get it over with? Anyway. That's all I did for all the greenery. I just go in with the lightest shade. While everything's still wet, I drop in the medium shade and then the darkest shade keeping it messy, you know, nothing needs to be even or perfect. And since everything is still wet, it's all going to kind of move. It's also going to settle in like the pierce line detail and everything that's die cut when you run it through the machine, which is another reason why I love to die cut and then add color. Because I also like to see where, you know, where my die cuts are, where the pieces are, where this is, that is, etc. Because I get asked that a lot as well. Why not just like paint a background and then die cut it? You wouldn't get the same results. You totally can do it. With ones like this, it's also a little extra difficult because it's all on one wafer die. So I just find it easier to, die cut from watercolor paper or die cut from white cardstock and then ink blend what I want to do. You know, just so many options. So did all the greenery. The flower centers were just cappuccino and mocha inks. And then for the actual blooms, I'm using Peony, of course, and Rose, which is the darker shade. And then I dropped that honey shade just on the edges, like the very tips of the petals. So I put on the Peony shade, which is the lighter shade of pink, but it's still a very intense pink. And then I drop in the Rose shade towards like the base, you know, the bottom of each petal. And then I drop in the honey at the tip. And again, I just let them do their thing. And with the sticky mat, I do not wash these. I don't recommend you wash them. You definitely don't use any sort of like soap or detergent. You'll remove the actual sticky adhesive. I just rinse it under the sink. That's it. And I let it air dry. They get stained. It got extra stained because I was using like bright pink inks because pinks stain everything. I'm fine with it. But yeah, I just rinse it under. I let everything dry. When I remove it from the panel, I just rinse it under the sink, let it air dry, put the little protective piece back on top of it, and then I save the sticky mat for the next time I want to use it. So by this point, my backgrounds with the stencil paste are dry. So I just use that same cabbage ink and I just smush that onto my palette. And this time I just use a larger watercolor brush. My watercolor brushes this time I'm using are the Altenew ones. So it's like a set of multiple sizes. So I just took a larger brush, added a bunch of water, and just literally like slapped it onto these backgrounds. Like I just wanted some color. That's it. So did the same thing, let those dry. By this point, my pieces of all these die cuts were completely dry. So I just got to adhere them together. This comes together really easily. It's pretty simple. You can just look at how it's supposed to look like on the packaging. And it's like, oh, these three pieces layer together, add one of the little flower centers. There we go. The funny little squiggly piece is for the one leaf, which I'll show. And then there's these two little pieces make the little bud, and the smaller one just lines up right on top. So you got your little bud, and then that little squiggly piece layers on the large leaf. So you could choose to leave that off. Just depends on how you want to do it. So adhere that into place, and then the little bud just gets stuck to the large stem piece there. And that's it. I chose not to because I'll adhere the florals, like the big florals separately. And that's it. It's simple. Love it. Love it. Fabulous. I'm sure I'll be using this set more in future videos because you guys know me, floral die cuts and peonies and all the things. I'm like, yep, love them. So got those assembled, and then my backgrounds were dry. So now I'm going to trim these down because they were originally just my pre-cut pieces. So I need these to be smaller than A2 card bases, and I ended up trimming them down even more. So I ended up trimming them down to like 3 3/4 by 5 inches. Yeah. And once I was happy with that, I'm going to repeat the process on the second background. So I've got those die cut, and then I'm going to adhere my greenery and florals to these backgrounds and just use my craft tacky glue to adhere them as well. And then once I've got those adhered into place, we're going to add some splatter because, that's what I like to do. And if you don't like to do it, you don't need to. That's the beauty of crafting. It's like, take what you like, leave what you don't, do what you like, leave what you don't, But I like me some splatters, so of course I'm using my Pick a Fence Studios Paper Splatter Watercolor Liquid White Snowflake because it's shimmery goodness. And I go in pretty heavy-handed with this. Because it's still subtle, even with the amount I had. It's when the light hits it, you see the shimmery bits. So I stuck that on my palette, had these in my little splat box, heavily splattered these with my little fan brush. And then I'm also going to go in with some white gouache. So I'm going to put a bit of white gouache onto onto my little palette. I'm going to water it down a fair bit just so that it's not like stark white. Again, it just depends on personal preference. But the more you water it down, obviously the more transparent it starts to become. So I watered it down, and then I'm going to also heavily splatter this on here. But with gouache, it'll kind of absorb some of the color that it lands on as well, depending on what you're splattering it on top of. And yeah, it just gives extra texture. I love it. So splatter that onto both of these backgrounds again, and then cleaned everything up, wiped off my palette, cleaned off my little fan brush, etc. And once I've got these completely splattered to, you know, whatever I feel is good, set those aside to dry. And then I'm using the CZ Design Bad Day Good Vibes set. I've used this in multiple videos as well. I really like this stamp set. And one of my favorite sentiments from it, which says sending a paper hug. So I've got a piece of doll pink cardstock, and I used my anti-static powder tool on that, and that just prevents the embossing powder from clinging to anything but the stamped image. And then I stamped the sentiment with just clear embossing ink, and then poured over the detail white embossing powder, tapped off the excess, and then I'm going to melt that with my heat tool till everything is smooth and shiny and melted. Once everything is melted, I'll then take my microfiber cloth and just buff away that excess anti-static powder. And then I'm going to use the coordinating wafer die to die cut the sentiments. And I'm just going to tape the wafer die into place so that it doesn't shift when I run this through my die cut machine. So get the die centered, tape it into place, die cut the sentiment, repeat on the second one. Super simple. And then for the insides of my cards, I just took 2 panels of just smooth white cardstock. And these I'm sticking to one of my grip mats. Especially this one, because it's big enough to hold 2. And then I'm going to use that stencil again with the lightest green ink, so the cabbage ink. And I'm going to stencil that onto both of these panels, just to give a little bit of color, a little bit of pattern. Love. And purposely not trying to get like even coverage, you know, same thing. Just it's a little lighter here, a little darker here. That's great. It gives it more interest. I'm fine with that. So blended that onto both of these panels, just like so. And then I took one of the little companion sentiments from that Bad Day Good Vibes set, and I'm going to stamp that onto both of these panels with some VersaFine Clair Nocturne ink. I'd also trimmed these panels down. They were A2 when I stenciled them, but then I trimmed them down to the same size as the card fronts, so 3 3/4 by 5 inches. So got those stamped on for the inside panels, and then grabbed some baker's twine from my stash. The splatter, everything is dry now, so I'm going to wrap this around the card fronts. I start my bow, use my reverse tweezers to hold the knot. That way I can sit here and zhuzh and fiddle with the bow till I get it the way I want it. Once I'm happy with it, you pull it tight, remove the reverse tweezers, pull it tight again, fiddle with it a little bit more, and then repeat the process on the second card front. And then I decided I wanted to frame this a little bit, so I took some of Simon's Sunshine cardstock and made it just like trimmed it to slightly larger. So it was like just over 3 3/4 and 5 inches, like 1/8 of an inch on each side wider. And then I took my Tim Holtz distressor tool and roughed up all the edges with that. So that just adds again a little more texture, a little more dimension. And then I'm going to adhere the card fronts to the frame piece or matte piece with my craft tacky glue. And then I just use my my little magnets to hold everything down so that all the surfaces are touching the next layer of cardstock, because with that baker's twine in the way, you want to make sure everything's like actually cardstock's touching cardstock. Let the glue dry. Easy. Another thing I do, and I show in a lot of videos, I'll stick it under my MISTI. You know, something just to hold everything down a little bit while I go on to the next thing, which was roughing up the next panel of cardstock and repeating the process. So roughed up all those edges, and then I'm going to adhere this panel as well to its little frame of yellow cardstock, and then just transfer all the magnets over to that side, hold everything down for a minute just to give the glue a chance to adhere everything. And then my card bases are more dull pink cardstock. So I just cut a sheet in half, and then I'm scoring these at 5.5 inches. So they'll be top folding A2 note cards. So 4 1/4 by 5.5. So I scored those, reinforced that score with the Sadama bone folder. And then the panels that I had stenciled and stamped the sentiments, I'm just going to adhere those to the insides of my card bases here. So get those adhered into place, just like so. And that was also why I trimmed them down, because then the card base like frames these panels so you can actually see the pink cardstock. So got those adhered to the inside, and then I'll adhere the card fronts to the card bases. And then once the card fronts are adhered, the sentiments, I'm just going to put a little bit of thin foam squares on the back of them and pop those into place. And then, as always, can't stop there. Got to have like just a few little embellishments. And same thing, just hold magnets, hold them in place. It's like extra pairs of hands, you know? So added the thin little foam squares to the sentiment and then pop those into place. And then my final little bit of embellishment, I dug through, again, my multiple lifetime stash and found some little yellow confetti. So these are the Trinity Stamps Drops of Sunshine confetti. So got some of those in a little tray and then just kind of sprinkled those around each of these card fronts. And then once I was happy with how, like my placement, copied it on the second card, and then I'm just going to adhere these into place, just picking them up with my little embellishment wand, gluing them down with a little bit of craft tacky glue, and then all I got to do is let the glue dry and these cards are complete. So like I mentioned in the intro, I will post links to all the supplies I use. Those will be directly below the video. I will also have a link to my blog post, because if you hop over to the blog post, it's all picture links, a little easier to navigate. And yeah, all that info is below for anyone who is interested. As always, thank you all so very much for taking the time to watch my videos, for thumbs upping, commenting. It does help a ton. It just tells those robot overlords you guys like what you see. And I do. I appreciate it. And yeah, subscribe if you haven't. I'd love to have you. And I'll see you all very soon in the next video. Bye.